Worked in the Middle East with Petroleum Development Oman as my client and lived in Muscat for 2 years. And here we are 25 years later and I'm still working in the energy industry and really enjoying it.
How was the acceptability by the client and how were you able to fit in that culture?
I always like to think that people accept people based on their knowledge, their competency and their capability. So I think having an open mind and approaching those places that I've worked at and the people I work with an open mind has been important, and it's kind of served me well, and I've really not had any issues.
What changes do you see in oil and gas industry?
Studies showed that of those 10,000 US companies, only 36% have a talent management strategy, which blows my mind. I think in the energy industry, where we've got a lot of people retiring, the baby boomers are retiring, talent is going to be a key issue for us in the future.
This is the Oil and Gas Breaking Bias show, where we are going to invite industry leaders to talk about their journeys and also technologies of tomorrow, in an effort to break some of the biases that might have formed around this energy industry. Hello everyone, I hope you're happy and healthy. I'm Anand Jha and you are listening to the Oil and Gas Breaking Bias show. This show is about the leaders who have made it big in this energy industry, and I'm very happy today because we will be joined by Dr. Lance Mortlock, who is a managing partner at Ernst & Young and author of multiple books. He has over 2 decades of experience while working with many projects across 11 countries, which has established him as a trusted advisor for many top leaders in oil and gas, energy, and beyond. He is go-to voice for energy trends and strategy, and frequently featured in multiple media outlets. So with that, let's welcome Lance and talk about his insights on energy transformation and also about his upcoming book called Outside In, Inside Out. Welcome, Lance.
Thank you for having me on your show. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Thank you so much for joining. It was very hard to coordinate all our schedule, and finally we are here. So I'm very happy you got a time to join this podcast. But without any further delay, we have a lot to talk about your journey, about your book, and the transformation that might be happening in this energy industry. So without any delay, can you walk us through your personal and professional journey and some of the biases that you might have came across?
So I started my journey at university in the UK. You could probably tell from my accent. Originally from the UK, born in London, and spent the first few years doing my undergraduate degree, which I studied in Exeter, which is in the West Country of England. So I did a science undergrad and then went straight in to do a full-time MBA, which was quite unusual at the time because normally you would spend a few years working in business before you do an MBA. But I decided that I wanted to switch from science to business, and a good way of getting a grounding of understanding from a business perspective was to do my MBA at Cardiff Business School, which I did, as I said, full time. And then from my MBA, I met a professional services company. At the time, they were called Anderson Consulting. At a career fair in Cardiff for postgraduates. And so I got speaking to some of the lovely people that worked at Anderson Consulting, and they said, look, have you ever considered working in consulting and strategic advice? And I hadn't, but then I started to look into it. Long story short, ended up joining Anderson Consulting. First project, worked in the Middle East with Petroleum Development Oman as my client and lived in Muscat for 2 years. And here we are 25 years later and I'm still working in the energy industry and really enjoying it. So that's kind of how I started my career and got into the energy business.
How old were you at that time when you had a chance to move to Oman?
So let's see. I finished my undergraduate when I was 21, did my MBA when I was 22. So I would have been 23 when I moved to the Middle East.
A totally different experience, I could say that.
Yeah, for sure. And it was kind of a really interesting time to be in the Middle East because, you know, I was there from 1999, I think, 2001, 2002. And that was around the same time the US the 9/11 happened, and there was a lot of risk and uncertainty in the world, which is something that we'll talk about, I think, later. I've written a lot about risk and uncertainty, but I was in the Middle East as the US were deploying in Afghanistan, and it was a crazy time.
I can imagine. That's why I asked you. And also, you're that young and starting your career almost from unknown territory. How was the acceptability by the client, and how were you able to fit in that culture?
I always like to think that people accept people based on their knowledge, their competency, and their capability. I think you need to be in any culture. I mean, I've lived in and worked in 11 countries around the world, and my approach has always been to understand their culture, their business norms, their way of operating and practices, and not assume that, my way of being from the UK and being from the West is always the right way or the best way. So I think having an open mind and approaching those places that I've worked at and the people I've worked with an open mind has been important, and it's kind of served me well, and I've really not had any issues.
No, definitely. And that makes a big difference when you connect with the people on the personal level. And then you can drive all the changes that we more talk about today, the
Yeah,
transformation, the changes that we need to implement.
100%.
And how was your transition to Ernest and Young and later to Canada?
Yeah, so spent a few years working with Anderson Consulting in the Middle East. It became known as Accenture, and they IPO'd and went through all of that change. And then I went to work in several other countries. So I worked in Holland for a while in Rijswijk, worked in Norway, had the opportunity to work back in the Middle East with in the UAE, in Abu Dhabi, Qatar. I worked in Malaysia for a while. So I worked in all these different countries, sometimes for a long period of time, sometimes for short stints. So great foundation, I'd say in the first 10 years of my career. And then there was an opportunity. I was doing some work with a Canadian oil and gas company with a head office, or with an office in London in the UK. And they said, have you ever considered working in Canada? And I said, no. But I'm intrigued by the opportunity. I'm a skier. My wife's a skier. I love the mountains, love the outdoors, and like being in places where there's, a really thriving business environment. And so the opportunity came up to move with Accenture to Calgary to start their office in Calgary, which is what I did. So moved to Calgary with my wife. She works in an oil and gas company as well, so lots of opportunity for her to transfer with her past organization. Joined the Calgary team, grew the Accenture team over a year and a half or so, and then EY approached me and said, look, we're looking to start a strategy practice within consulting. We would love to have someone like you join our organization and help us really drive growth and expand our business. So I did that while living in Calgary, and at the same time serving a lot of energy companies in Canada and in Calgary, both in the upstream, midstream, downstream, energy ministries, energy associations, you named it. I was able to advise and support clients in all aspects of the industry. And I've been at EY now for the last 15 years in various roles, supporting clients in now what's called the industrials and energy space, and taken on, increased leadership responsibility and a wider remit. And it's been really fun.
And that's great. So now you're close to the mountain. That what was that you were looking for.
Yeah, exactly. I can ski at the weekends when I like. And two girls that were born here became Canadian as well, which I'm very proud about. So it's been
and that's really great. You also talk about you worked in multiple countries and also across different companies. How do you see the acceptability for change? Because normally we talked about energy or oil and gas industry. We know they are resistant to any change. So do you see is a country specific, or is a culture specific, or is a company specific approach? Like every company or every culture acts differently to change.
I mean, I wouldn't say I've seen particular countries that are more or less resistant to change. I think the nuances, shall I say, involved in terms of how to approach change might be different a little bit. Probably what's more striking in my mind is different organizations and different types of organizations are more or less adept to the change. So I've worked in organizations where, it's very clear that change is desired, it's going to happen. There's top-down leadership support, there's organizational support, employee support, and there's generally a culture of enabling and supporting change. And then I've worked in organizations where it's completely the opposite. And, they're kind of living in an age where they don't want anything to change. And, you look at some of the business practices that are involved and you're like, it's wild that this company is still operating and considering, working this way. I mean, I worked in one organization, I won't say where because it will be easy for you to tell who it is, but I was working with a national oil company somewhere in Asia, shall we say. And I found it wild that the number of organizational levels from CEO to frontline was 19.
It's a lot.
Right? So in Canada or in North America, usually from CEO to frontline is 7, 8, maybe 9 levels. So to have double that number of levels from an organizational structure perspective is problematic in terms of moving with speed, being nimble, being able to get decision-making done quickly. So very different, practices and therefore very different, I would say, ability to drive change at speed.
Do you think it's changing now? Like there's a hierarchical the structure. It's changing now in Asia or some other part of the world. We know in North America it's pretty much flat structure.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Rupert Murdoch, there's a famous quote that he once said that the world is changing very fast. Big will not beat small anymore. It'll be the fast beating the slow. So whether it's what Rupert Murdoch's saying or, IBM came out with a stat that said the speed of change today will never be this slow again. So change is inevitable. It feels like change is speeding up. And so our ability to deal with change needs to get better. And I think I'm seeing lots of organizations appreciate the environment that they're operating in and therefore the speed of change that they need to adapt to happening at the same time as well. So, in answer to your question, I think organizations are getting better at this.
And I have seen the same thing, especially after COVID, especially oil and gas companies, they're more open for ideas. And that's we started to see. And there is more and more collaboration between vendors, between solution providers than what we used to be earlier. And I think it's a big change I see in this energy industry.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, if you think about what oil and gas and energy companies are doing around, advanced analytics, data management, data governance, AI, the use of ChatGPT, digital monitoring on assets, autonomous vehicles, for example, in oil sands up here in Canada, like the speed of technology adoption is getting faster. And I think that's in response to the world that we live in, which is, full of risk and uncertainty.
Definitely. And I read somewhere it used to be years or maybe multiple years of that innovation cycle used to be like really long. And now it's 6 months or maybe shorter. So if you don't move that fast, you might get obsolete by the time the product or solution will come in the market. And any view on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think success in terms of innovation is taking a portfolio-based approach. It's one of the things that I talk about in my new book, which we'll get to later. But this idea of, there are those big disruptive changes that, are long-term, maybe one or two of those areas that you want to focus on. But then you have the immediate sustaining change, which are those small micro moves that you make on a continuous basis. And you might do hundreds of those, not one or two. And then you have the adjacent changes in the middle, which is kind of a combination of both. Success is like, how do we look at all of that in a portfolio? Make sure that we're looking at what's happening right now, we need to change right now, what's happening next in terms of the medium term, and then what's happening long term in terms of the beyond. And you've got to look at all of those horizons together.
That makes sense. So you're talking about change. What other changes do you see in oil and gas industry? Because you're dealing with them very closely.
I mean, there's obviously digitization, which is happening all the time. And I think the latest stats say that in 2024, the world spent $2.5 trillion on digital investments globally. I mean, it's just amazing when you think about it. And that's set to continue. And I think that by association, that's going to continue in the energy industry. So that's kind of, number one in terms of the trends that I see. Number two is associated with that increased automation of the assets in terms of remote monitoring, remote operations. I think we're going to continue to see different organizations invest in that automation where we've got less people in the field outside operating, these assets. Probably the other change that I think we'll continue to see, despite what we might hear from the incoming US administration, is ongoing focus on energy transition. 2024, according to NASA, and the official stats came out on this, I think last week, was the hottest year on record since records begun in the 80s. So the planet is getting warmer, and it's getting warmer rapidly. And I think we'll see oil and gas companies continue to push for cleaner, decarbonized ways of operating those assets. And we've seen that from some of the super majors. I mean, despite what the US administration might say, companies like ExxonMobil and others are saying, look, energy transition and policy around energy transition is important. We need to continue to do that. I suspect in the next 4 years, we'll see a bit of a slowdown in terms of the speed of adoption. And I talk a lot about this idea of the energy trilemma. And I wrote a paper with my team around the 2050 energy system in Canada. And I talk about affordability, security, and energy sustainability. Those three things will continue to be important, but I think the emphasis globally is going to be on affordability and energy security in the next few years. Energy sustainability will take a little bit of a backseat, but I think long term it's going to continue to be important, and it's going to be a priority for energy companies to focus on. Number three is talent. Surprisingly, there was a study recently done on over 10,000 US companies. And the study showed that of those 10,000 US companies, only 36% have a talent management strategy, which blows my mind because a key enabler of strategy is having the right talent and the capability. So if you don't have a talent management strategy, it's not really a priority and it's a bit of a gap. I think in the energy industry where we've got a lot of people retiring, the baby boomers are retiring, talent is going to be a key issue for us in the future. And I think we'll see energy companies, globally and in particular in the US, prioritize where they're going to get talent in the future to support what continues to be a very exciting industry, and fundamental to economies around the world.
Like you already hit lots of good points. One thing is about the talent management. I fully agree. This industry is going through transformation right now, and we have to bring new talent because this industry is not going anywhere. As you said, there could be some speed changes, there could be some spikes about adoption, but this industry is transforming itself, and that will continue to create lots of opportunity for new people. If they come here, they can build their career, they can build multiple businesses. So their opportunities will always be there. And that's exactly how I see. And as you said, like lots of people are going to retire, so those positions need to be filled with the new talent.
Right, absolutely.
But a really fascinating stats you just mentioned about, like very few companies are looking into that one. But if there's no good talent, sooner or later you will feel that vacuum.
Yeah, you will. And I think it's fundamental to enabling a strategy is having the right talent and capability and org structure and some other things in place to support execution of what you're trying to achieve strategically.
Definitely. Coming back, we talked about so many different things about strategy, transformation. Coming back to your book that you have wrote before, I think that's sync on this topic, which is disaster proof. It came when? Like a few years ago, correct?
Yeah, it was 4 years ago.
4 years ago, yes.
Yeah, and so it was during COVID. We were living in this really interesting time where, everybody's working from home and we're wondering what's happening in the world as life as we know it fundamentally changed for that period of time. And it struck me that these periods of risk and uncertainty keep happening in history, whether it's, the OPEC oil crisis, the tequila crisis, the global banking crisis, the dot-com bubble crisis. It keeps happening. And every time we're like, wow, but that was a really risky, uncertain period. Like, glad that's over. Let's go back to business as usual. And I
It's
was
like
like,
a black
hold on a
swan.
minute.
Like there's another book on this topic, Black Swan. Unless you face that event, you think it doesn't exist. It cannot happen.
Humans are really interesting like that, right? In terms
Yes,
of, when we're in the moment, we're like, this is awful. But then we quickly forget and we
definitely.
get back to normal and the old ways of working. And I was like, hold on, but we need better tools. We need to be thinking about the future as management teams, as leaders of organizations in fundamentally different ways. So disaster proof was all about refreshing the need for good future thinking using scenarios, not a new tool. Shell and others have used scenario planning for longer than 50 years. The military were the original users of scenario planning. In fact, I did a really interesting interview with General Petraeus, who used to run the CIA in the US, and he talks a lot about using scenario planning in the Iraq War and how it's a very powerful tool around thinking about the future. So I wrote Disaster Proof, during the pandemic, because I felt we needed better tools to deal with risk and uncertainty. And I was kind of right. And subsequent to the pandemic, I've been spending a lot of time with EY teams and my clients working to support future thinking in a more progressive way and stress testing strategies using scenarios. And it's been really interesting to be involved in.
And how it can be used as an individual, and then the scenario planning.
Well, that's the interesting thing. And I dedicate part of a chapter on this in the book, which is this idea that you can scale it to look at sort of macro situations. One of the famous examples I talk about in the book is Event 201, where the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Johns Hopkins University, and the World Economic Forum came together to scenario plan what a global pandemic might look like. And they did this a year before the actual pandemic happened, funny enough.
Really?
Yeah, you can read about it online. And they almost perfectly predicted what played out real time during the COVID-19.
Very interesting.
So you can do it at that macro level to say, okay, what if a pandemic happened or a global war, like what would happen and what are the implications? But you can scale it down to very specific levels where, I've worked with small non-for-profit organizations and successfully used it with effect where, it might be 4 or 5 employees and everything in between, whether it's at the macro level, the industry level, the company level, capital project level, a small non-for-profit level. It just becomes a question of how much time, how many different stakeholders are involved, maybe how many scenarios you develop, and you scale it up and down to suit your needs.
No, something. Let's talk about your upcoming book, Outside In, Inside Out. Like the name itself is very interesting, and dealing with the business on day-to-day basis, I could see sometimes we are internally focused.
Right.
When we talk about the SWOT analysis, and I always say it's more internally focused, like you're not considering what is happening around you. So how this strategy is different. Can you talk a little bit more about it?
Yeah. So shameless plug, new book, Outside In, Inside Out. And success is the overlap of the two, right? The bullseye. That's what we're aiming for at the end of the day. Comes out on the 25th of February, as you mentioned. It really is the culmination of 25 years worth of work as a strategic advisor. What I wanted to do was give a new, refreshed, practical approach to strategy development and execution. And one of the things that's probably most fundamental that I talk about in the book is this idea of vertical and horizontal balance. The vertical balance is this idea that you've got the outside in thinking. Do we understand what's happening in the outside world? What are our customers telling us? What are the market indicators telling us? What are our scenarios telling us? What are the key outside factors that inside affect us? Do we understand those? Are we opening our eyes to the world, the market, the industry, the countries that we operate in? Combining that with the inside thinking, which is our portfolio, how it's performing, benchmarks, internal business performance, our risks, our operating model. And success is combining those two things, that vertical, that my experience, Anand, has been many organizations are very, as you point out, internally focused and don't spend enough time thinking about what's going on outside. Success is both. So that's the first balance. The second balance, the horizontal balance, is this idea that you can take the outside and the inside and make winning choices. But if you don't execute well, it doesn't matter. And so success, and I dedicate half the book to this, is on relentless execution. I point out that, 36% of organizations don't have a talent management strategy. Yeah. Most organizations struggle with prioritization. So you need to prioritize well. You need the right structure organizationally. You need the right operating model. You need the right initiatives. You need the right roadmap. You need the right cost approach. You need the right innovation approach. So really the balance on the horizontal level is that winning strategies require a where to play, how to win strategy, but they also require balance in terms of relentless execution. And so that's really the mission that I'm on in terms of this book, is sharing that experience that I've gained over 25 years and the opportunity that I've had to advise numerous organizations around the world, saying there's a better way of doing this. And we have to do this because we live in a world where there's more risk and uncertainty in terms of war, the war in the Middle East, the war in Ukraine, the war in other parts of the world. There's risk and uncertainty in terms of nationalization, and we see that with the US administration coming in. There's climate change, frankly, which is creating an existential threat for society. So we need better strategic tools to practically approach strategy in a new and different way. And that's really what my book's about.
You hit a really good point. I have been part of many studies session. Like you always have an idea to talk about these topics about competition and the external factors. But what I have seen with the time, we always go back inside. My factory is not helping. Like I'm not getting the right support. We don't have the right product. So all the discussion always comes back to internally focused. I think it's important, but at the same time, as you said, there is a balance, and they intersect each other. External focus and internal focus, they intersect each other. I have a follow-up question. Yes, it's very much understood. It should be clear balance between external and internal focus. But how companies should promote this? Like most of the time, you have a good idea, but it doesn't take shape. It fails after a while because people are working either in silos or and they have a different priority. So how you come over that challenge?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I talk about in the book is the connected glue that ties all these different components, whether it's the outside in, the inside out, preparing to execute and execute. You need to weave, this patchwork together. You need that connected tissue that holds the different pieces together, that makes sure, for example, when we're thinking about our enterprise risks, that's connected into the strategic planning. When we're thinking about how our portfolio performs, that's connected to capital allocation. When we're thinking about cost or innovation, that's connected to the priorities strategically that we're focused on. Leadership is really important in terms of acting as the glue that holds this thing together. Whether that's the leadership top down from the CEO, business unit, or functional leaders, leadership is fundamental to the success of this and ensuring that those pockets of ideas come to the surface and actually get acted on by the organization. So that's number one. Number two, I think, is communication. There's this age-old saying that you need to communicate something sometimes 10 times to the frontline employee, and it starts to feel... stick. Yeah, like it feels awkward. You're like, I've communicated this already. Let's move on. No, you need to communicate it again and again and again. I think we underestimate the importance of world-class communication when trying to, execute against a strategy. And I talk about, the importance of communication when executing, a strategy in an organization. So there's leadership, there's communication. And I think related to communication is this idea of how you cascade things within an organization and taking a very deliberate approach to cascading the messages, the methods, the choices, making sure organizations understand functions and business units. Okay, we understand top down what corporate, what the leader, the CEO is trying to achieve, but do we understand what it means to us? How would we interpret? And that's part of this cascade, which I think is really important.
That's really good topic. A lot to learn from these two books. And first, you talk about is scenario planning. I think that fits very well, like, especially in these kind of things that is happening around us. So we have already seen the war, the supply chain challenges that COVID taught us a lot. But it seems like we are again falling back the world it was before, and everybody thinking that was just one event, but it could happen again.
Yeah.
This upcoming book, Outside and Inside Out, about there should be good balance. And one thing I've realized is communication is not enough. And that sometimes we ignore this important topic. If somebody's putting a plan to grow, then it should be communicated in each and every meeting. It should be part of communication that goes to the employees. And so everybody start to believe it's not just a topic it once discussed and forget about it. They should feel it's happening, and your leader, your CEOs are serious about it. Sometimes we just talk about our plan, we talked about our ambition, and then everybody forgets about it, and then they go and get busy on day-to-day stuff, So that need to be changed, if somebody is really serious about it.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, 1 in 10 CEO appointments fail within the first 2 years. So leaders have to get better at this. And 15% of companies in the top growth quartile sustain performance for at least 30 years, which is a really small percentage.
Okay.
So if we want organizations that last and CEOs that last, we need better strategies at the end of the day. And I think we're in this really interesting moment in history. So today we're recording this podcast, and it won't come out for a few weeks, but today we're seeing the US president get sworn in Washington. Really, as we speak, it's happening. And you take a step back from the moment that we're in right now, and you think more broadly what's happened in the world in the last 12 months. We've seen more elections than ever before. 8 out of 10 of the world's most populous countries held elections in 2024.
Yes.
That's 4 billion voters. And the reason that's important for your listeners is with 4 billion people voting in the planet in the last year, that's a huge amount of change. With change comes uncertainty and risk. And that is why organizations need better strategies and, they need better tools. And that's why I wrote my book.
That's great. I have another topic. You already touched base on the talent management, but if somebody is looking to make big in this industry, what will be one key takeaway?
Make big in the oil and gas industry and the energy industry.
Energy industry.
Boy. Yeah.
Or maybe in consulting and strategy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the energy industry, making big, I think it's going to be interesting. If you look at the number of discoveries, big oil and gas discoveries around the world, it's kind of shrinking. And part of that is because we're investing less in the industry. But I think better technologies around discoveries is going to be a really interesting area in terms of exploration for oil and gas. That's probably one. The other area that I'm watching with a keen level of interest is how we use AI, in particular around reservoir and subsurface modeling. Complexity involved from a geology, petrophysics, geophysics, geotechnical perspective has always been, like, to me as a non-subsurface person, this sort of black box of very smart people that kind of work in this space. I think some of the advances that we see around complex modeling and the use of AI is really going to shake up that part of the industry. And that's going to be one to watch in terms of the future. I think another area in terms of, to your point around making it big, will be around energy transition. And what we see around kind of carbon capture, sequestration, carbon credits, the carbon markets, anything that we see around reducing CO2 emissions in the value chain and innovation in that space is going to be really important in the next 2 decades. And new technology and innovations that we see in that area will be an opportunity, I think, for entrepreneurs to make it big.
Oh, that's really great point. And I could see that from exploration to new technology and uses of AI. This industry is not that boring. We talked about how the adoption of digital technology has grown in the recent past, but the industry is also moving towards adoption of AI. And I think somebody wants to make it big in this industry, either related to AI or anything related to carbon. Carbon is a big topic. So there is opportunities. There are lots of opportunities here. We are running out of time, but I will ask you another question, Lance. You work with the oil and gas or energy companies. I will put all the energy companies in one basket. You work with them very closely. What one bias that still exists in the industry or towards industry, and that we should overcome?
Biased. I mean, I can't think of any in particular that come to mind, but I think one of the challenges that we have as it relates to energy transition in the industry is because it's such a long-term problem that we need to solve that potentially goes beyond a political term, beyond a career, in fact, that might span 30, 40 years. Sometimes it's very hard, I think, for leaders to take a very long-term, truly long-term view in solving one of society's most important issues. And I think that's a challenge for us as leaders, is that I'm making decisions today that we may not see the true impact on for another 20, 30 years, and I'll be well retired at that point in time. And so that leadership challenge, I think, is problematic in terms of truly innovating and pushing the envelope in terms of energy transition.
I fully agree, but that challenge will getting bigger and bigger. How the leader can make long-term decision when he's measured on quarter-to-quarter performance?
Exactly. Yeah, and it's, we operate in this free market system that's incented by results.
Yes.
And it's interesting to watch some of the major oil and gas companies around the world kind of pull back in terms of, they're really not getting rewarded from the market for some of their, call it, green investments. So maybe that system isn't what we need anymore for some of the problems that we're trying to solve and not fit for purpose. I don't know. It's way above my pay grade.
I know, and this topic, this discussion will continue, but very interesting discussion. One side, I think as a human, everybody agrees changes need to be made. But if your metrics, your KPIs are not aligned, and we just talked about the leaders, if the CEOs' KPIs are not aligned with this long-term performance, and they will look into quarter-to-quarter results.
Yeah.
And they will make a decision which might be helping them to increase their revenue or increase their profit in short period than 4 to 5 years of timeline.
That's right.
So thank you so much, Lance. A lot to absorb, a lot to learn. We're running out of time, but thank you so much for sharing all the insights. And I think that will go long way for our listeners. And also with that, best of luck with your book, which is coming next month. And hopefully everybody can read that book and learn from it. Because we just talked about how important it is to look externally as well as internally and find the right balance of a strategy. So with that, before we sign off, Lance, anything to add here?
No, I mean, my book's available on the 25th of February. It'll be on Amazon, Indigo, Barnes & Noble. It's available on most of the major platforms across North America. So if you're interested in learning more and being able to think more strategically, grab a copy.
That's great. So best of luck with your book, Lance. And with that, we'll sign off this week. Keep listening, Oil and Gas Breaking By Show. Thank you. Have a great day.